Have you ever stood before a crumbling ruin and wondered how it's still standing? How the stones of a temple built thousands of years ago can survive earthquakes, floods, and time itself? While our modern buildings barely last a lifetime, maybe. The ancients knew something we don't. Tonight, we're going to slow down and listen, not to myths or miracles, but to the quiet intelligence of ancient builders. The people who shaped mountains into monuments, carved rivers into roads, and made stone breathe. From the Egyptians who leveled the desert with water, to the Romans who mixed concrete that heals itself, to the Inca who built walls that move with the earth, we'll uncover what ancient engineers understood, that we somehow forgot. So settle in. Let the hum of history carry you back through time to a world built by patience, by rhythm, by hands that measured eternity one stone at a time. Because sometimes the smartest minds in history never wrote a single word. They left their wisdom in stone. And tonight, we'll learn to read it. When you think of intelligence today, you might picture a screen, a circuit, or a laboratory filled with equations scribbled on glass. But thousands of years ago, before calculators, before printed paper, before the very idea of science, builders shaped mountains into monuments and deserts into living cities using nothing more than their senses, their memory, and time. They built to last not for decades, but for eternity. And the farther we move into an age of planned obsolescence, the more their quiet genius feels like something we've misplaced, rather than outgrown. To understand how ancient builders worked, you have to slow your mind to their rhythm. Picture a morning on the Giza Plateau. Around 2500 BCE, the air is cool, the Nile is still misted, and thousands of workers begin their day by dragging stone blocks the size of small cars across damp sand. There are no blueprints, no cranes, only voices calling cadence and the whisper of wood sleds gliding on wet ground. This is the start of one of humanity's most enduring puzzles. Not how they built the Great Pyramid, but how they built it so precisely. The base of that structure, laid on uneven desert bedrock, is level within less than an inch. Its sides align almost perfectly with the four cardinal directions. For centuries, people have credited lost technologies or alien intervention for such perfection. But the truth is simpler and more humbling. The builders weren't superhuman. They were simply very, very good at being human. They watched. They measured. They repeated. Egyptian engineers used ropes, stars, and water. The simplest tools, but in perfect combination. They stretched ropes tight between stakes to mark straight lines. They used a plumb bob, a string weighted with stone, to find verticals. They dug shallow trenches around the foundation, filled them with water, and watched the ripples settle, showing where the ground was perfectly level. They worked with nature, not against it, and when they looked up at the night sky, they saw order. The slow circling of the stars gave them orientation. The north-south axis of the pyramid was aligned by observing two stars that never set, circling the celestial pole like eternal sentinels. When those two stars aligned vertically above the horizon, the rope stretchers marked north. The rest followed. No magic, no mystery, just patience and the belief that accuracy was sacred. To the Egyptians, geometry wasn't abstract. It was moral. Straight lines represented the balance of the universe. Mat, the principle of truth and order. Every stone, every measurement was an act of devotion. A crooked wall wasn't just a mistake. It was a spiritual flaw, and so they measured again. The pyramid we now know was not built by slaves in chains, but by skilled laborers, seasonal workers, artisans, masons who lived in planned villages with bakeries, breweries, and medical care. They were fed, clothed, and trained to perform repetitive precision. That was their secret, not tools, but time. They didn't need iron chisels or mathematics written in symbols. They had generations of memory, each group specialized. One carved blocks, another leveled them, another hauled. The hierarchy of skill mirrored the hierarchy of belief. The king's tomb rose from the labor of thousands, but each stroke of the chisel held purpose. The pyramid was not built to defy time, it was built for time, as if the builders already knew that their names would be forgotten, but their work would remain. That's the first lesson ancient builders understood better than we do, that durability begins with humility. When the Romans came centuries later, their genius was not size, but structure. They didn't build monuments to eternity, they built systems for living. Roads, aqueducts, bridges, harbors. Things meant to be used, worn, repaired, and used again. They found beauty in repetition. The Romans learned early that strength could be mixed and poured. Their invention of concrete, opus cementitium, reshaped the world. But their formula wasn't the lifeless gray powder we use today. It was alive, a chemical collaboration between volcanic ash, lime, and seawater. When Roman concrete cracks, it heals. The lime particles inside react with moisture, recrystallizing and closing the fracture. It's self-repairing, something modern science only rediscovered recently. The Pantheon in Rome, built nearly 2,000 years ago, still has the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world. It shouldn't still be standing. The stresses should have torn it apart centuries ago. But the Romans understood weight like sculptors understand shadow. They graded the concrete, heavier basalt at the base, lighter pumice near the top, so the structure's mass flowed like a natural gradient. They didn't need computer models. They had intuition born of practice. What's extraordinary about ancient builders isn't what they didn't have, it's how little they needed. The Romans could build a bridge in weeks that would stand for millennia. They could drain swamps, redirect rivers, carve tunnels through mountains, not with dynamite or steel, but with pickaxes, patience, and math done on wax tablets. And when they designed their cities, they thought not in decades, but in cycles. Aqueducts curved along contours, roads drained into culverts, arches distributed weight with elegant economy. They didn't fight gravity, they used it. It's easy to think of ancient builders as lucky craftsmen who stumbled upon durability. But what they really possessed was something rarer, a worldview where nature was the engineer. They didn't impose geometry on the land. They found geometry in it. Take the qanats of Persia, underground, channels that carried water from mountains to arid plains for over 2,500 years. A qanat is simple, a sloping tunnel, dug by hand, lined with stone, and vented by vertical shafts that allow air circulation and maintenance. But its gradient, gentle, precise, unbroken, must be perfect. Too steep, and the water erodes the tunnel. Too shallow, and it stagnates. How did they keep it so exact across miles of desert? They used nothing but sight, sound, and thread. A master digger would stand at one shaft, his apprentice at the next, and they would call back and forth. The sound carried through the tunnel, echoing softly. From the pitch of that echo, they could tell the slope, a kind of auditory geometry. And somehow, with this method, they built systems that still work today, still delivering clean water to Iranian villages while modern pipes corrode. In the high mountains of the Andes, the Inca builders understood another secret, that the strongest structures aren't rigid, they breathe. Their temples and terraces were made of stones cut so precisely that you couldn't fit a blade between them. Yet they weren't mortared. They were dry laid, each block angled and interlocked so it could shift during an earthquake and settle back without breaking. Modern engineers study those joints to this day, marveling at the seamless fit achieved with only stone hammers and intuition. In places like Machu Picchu and Sacsayhuaman, you can trace the invisible lines where stone meets stone, each one a conversation between human intention and geological patience. The builders didn't standardize. Every block was shaped individually, responding to the stones around it. That irregularity, that apparent imperfection, is what made them last. We often think of technology as progress, but in ancient times, technology was wisdom. It was an inherited relationship between people and place. The Greeks built amphitheaters with such acoustic perfection that a whisper on stage can be heard 200 feet away. They didn't have amplifiers. They had geometry, the shape of the seating, the angle of the walls. Even the porosity of the limestone absorbed and reflected sound like a natural echo chamber. In the ruins of Epidaurus, you can still stand in the center of the stage and test it. Say a word softly, and it carries to the farthest seat. The ancients didn't just build. They listened. The same listening guided builders in Mesopotamia, where cities rose from mud brick and reeds along the Tigris and Euphrates. Their walls didn't endure like stone, but their layouts did, measured, gridded, and logical. They built ziggurats not to pierce the heavens, but to mirror them, their stepped shapes reflecting the cosmic ladder between gods and men. The very act of building was an imitation of divine order. And if you walk through the ruins of Babylon or Ur, you find something subtle: water channels that still align with astronomical paths. Drainage systems sloped so precisely that they could still function today. Even when their cities fell, their foundations remembered. In medieval times, as Europe rebuilt itself after centuries of turmoil, this ancient patience evolved into a new kind of brilliance, the Gothic cathedral. When you look up at the ribbed vaults of Chartres or Notre Dame, you see stone that seems to float, light that becomes architecture. But beneath that beauty lies mathematics as precise as any equation. Builders didn't calculate with numbers. They measured with chords and proportions, with geometry passed through guilds like sacred recipes. The circle, the triangle, and the square governed every arch and window. The cathedral was a frozen hymn, its rhythm dictated by the same ratios that define musical harmony. And yet, even as they reached for heaven, the builders kept their feet on the ground. They used local stone, local timber, and hand-forged iron. Every element came from the land, shaped by tools that hadn't changed in centuries. The construction might take a lifetime or several. A man could spend his entire career carving one column capital. Knowing he'd never see the roof finished, that patience, too, was a form of intelligence, an understanding that permanence takes time. Modern engineers can build taller, faster, cheaper, but we rarely build to last. Concrete cracks in decades, glass facades weather in years. Our monuments are designed for maintenance contracts, not immortality. Ancient builders knew better. They designed for erosion, for earthquakes, for centuries of wear. They embraced imperfection as a survival mechanism. Even when materials failed, design endured. Consider the lost Roman harbor at Caesarea, its massive breakwaters still visible beneath the waves. The Romans invented hydraulic concrete that set underwater, made from volcanic ash called pozzolana. When the ash met seawater, it triggered a slow crystallization that made the concrete stronger over time. The ocean, instead of destroying it, completed it. We rediscovered that chemical process only recently. For 2,000 years, the sea had been teaching us, but we had stopped listening. It's strange to realize how much of ancient wisdom came not from invention, but from attention. Builders studied wind patterns, soil moisture, sunrise angles, and material grain. They didn't separate science from craft or craft from religion. Everything was observation. A stonemason in ancient Greece didn't think in formulas. He thought in sound. He knew how a good stone rang under his chisel. A carpenter could tell moisture content by touch. A Roman engineer could sense slope by the way water flowed in a trench. Their intelligence wasn't abstract. It was embodied. Today, we call it primitive. But perhaps the primitive thing is believing that progress means forgetting. In some ways, the ancients understood balance better than we do, not just in architecture, but in philosophy. To them, perfection wasn't a straight line or a perfect cube. It was harmony with the world. The Egyptians aligned their temples to solstices, the Mayans to Venus, the Chinese to the flow of qi. Every beam, every column, was placed within a cosmic framework. Buildings were not separate from nature, they were extensions of it. And that brings us to perhaps the most forgotten truth of all. Ancient builders didn't see engineering as conquering nature. They saw it as listening to it. They built wind towers in Persia that caught desert breezes and funneled them down into cool chambers. They built underground ice houses that stored frozen water through the summer. They built stepwells in India that served as both reservoirs and temples, descending layer by layer into shadow and silence. These weren't merely functional structures, they were acts of coexistence. Each civilization, in its own quiet way, found balance between material and meaning. When the Greeks measured beauty, they spoke of symmetria, the relationship between parts and whole. When the Romans built arches, they said each stone leaned on the next, sharing the burden. When the medieval masons spoke of cathedrals, they used the word organism, not building. They believed their walls could breathe. We, by contrast, build walls that seal, roofs that suffocate, and systems that require constant repair. We build quickly because we assume time is short. Ancient builders built slowly because they assumed time was vast. And maybe that's the real reason their work endures. Their cathedrals, pyramids, roads, aqueducts, temples, and terraces all share one unspoken quality. They were made to belong to their environment. The stones at Machu Picchu are native to the mountain. The marble at the Parthenon was quarried within sight of Athens. The clay bricks of Mesopotamia were born from the same river silt that sustained its crops. Every structure was a dialogue between builder and land, between labor and landscape. That's what ancient builders understood that we've forgotten. That intelligence isn't always innovation. Sometimes it's continuity. You can still stand before their works and feel that continuity. The smooth face of a pyramid that once caught sunrise light. The Roman road, half buried in grass, still straight after 20 centuries. The echo under a stone archway that answers your voice like an old friend. These are not relics of a lost world. They're reminders of what human hands can do when they move with the rhythm of the earth. In the end, the ancients didn't build for applause or fame. They built for alignment with sky, with soil, with purpose. And though their cities fell, their wisdom didn't vanish. It lingers in the quiet geometry of the world, waiting for us to listen again. We often think we've surpassed them. But perhaps they reached a kind of understanding we no longer seek, that a straight line, a true angle, or a perfect fit isn't just a technical achievement. It's a form of peace, so when we look at what they left behind, the pyramids, the aqueducts, the temples, we aren't seeing lost wonders. We're seeing instructions, written not in ink but in stone. They tell us that progress isn't always forward. Sometimes it's remembering what was once known. And if you stand quietly enough, whether among the ruins of a Roman bath, under the arch of an old bridge, or at the shadowed base of a pyramid, you can almost hear it. The hum of patience, the whisper of measured hands, the ancient rhythm of people who built not to impress, but to endure. That's what the ancients understood, and what we've too often forgotten. That true engineering isn't about defying nature. It's about building in conversation with it, and those conversations, carried through time and stone, still speak softly, but clearly, if only we slow down long enough to listen. And that's where we'll leave our journey for tonight. Among the silent stones, the forgotten blueprints, and the quiet genius of people who built for forever. If you're still awake, thank you for staying with me through this slow drift through history. And if you've already drifted off somewhere between the pyramids and the Roman aqueducts, that's perfectly fine too. That's exactly what quiet, boring sleep is meant for. If you enjoy these calm stories from the past, please take a moment when you wake up or before you fall asleep to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and maybe share it with someone who loves a bit of peaceful history before bed. Your support helps me keep telling these slow, sleepy stories about the quiet moments that built our world. Until next time, sleep well, dream softly, and remember, even the most ordinary stones have stories to tell. This is quiet, boring sleep. Good night.